Hi, everybody. How are you today? I'm going to talk about lexical bundles in this video, just to help you familiarize yourselves with what they are and what they mean for language learning and also for literacy development. Um, I first became aware of the lexical bundle issue a number of years ago when I was working with language learners, and I kind of realized that straightforward traditional grammar didn't forcibly cover some aspects of their language development, nor did vocabulary in a word by word basis. And then I came across this concept called lexical bundles, which did a nice job of identifying or labeling this thing that I was trying to understand. So, the concept of lexical bundles comes out of the corpus linguistics tradition. And for those of you who don't know what corpus linguistics is, um, corpus linguistics is the study of large amounts of text that are stored in a database. I think I might have mentioned that in one of our other videos. But basically, you can have a corpus based on anything. I can collect all of a classroom of students' essays and digitize them and keep them in a database. And if I'm curious to see the extent to which my students as a group use the present progressive, I can start doing searches of the group and get group statistics, um, aggregate results. And then usually a corpus tool will also allow me to drill down and do searches by a particular individual. So I can see the extent to which the learner is doing like anything with ing at the end and see if there may or may not be changes over time. So that's what corpus is. There are a lot of corpora um, in order to do the vocab profile by Thomas Cobb. He's running off of the British National Corpus combined with the COCA corpus for something, something, something. And that's basically uh, digitized newspaper articles, magazine articles, and a wide variety of other textual input that are stored millions and millions of words. And when you study millions and millions of words in a single database, you can start extracting patterns. We are interested in these patterns because these patterns represent how native speakers use language consistently. We find groups of words, patterns of grammar, and they become targets for us as ESL teachers because we can see what natural language use is rather than somebody inventing out of their imagination or just based on their own individual experience um, how language is being used. So, um, what this group of people, these are some rather influential people in the corpus world, um, what they have done is they took university textbooks, so basically texts for academic purposes, and they ran them all into a database. And what they wanted to do was find consistencies across these textbooks. If you are familiar with the academic word list or the general service word list, then you are familiar with this concept of, in the case of the academic word list, these are words that, regardless of the subject area, you are going to find that list of words to be statistically very present, whether it be in history or science or mathematics or whatever subject you're dealing with. Um, that's the academic word list. So, what these folks are doing is they're saying, well, let's not just take things on a word by word basis. Let's not look just at nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs as single morphemic units. We know that English language and languages in general actually work with bundles of words. Um, that words are working in collocational groups, if you will. And so what they wanted to see was what groups of words seemed to keep reappearing across university textbooks, but also in language classrooms. Okay, and what they tried to do is to create a taxonomy. So first, to identify which groups of words keep resurfacing and under which contexts. Okay, and for those of you who would like to read this article, and I highly encourage it, here, of course, is the information. These are the authors. You can also email me, and I will be happy to share it with you. But you do, in fact, already have some resources, and I'll share that with you. So the basic premise is that these people ran all the textbooks into a computer and found multi-word sequences. Okay, and what we're trying to do is say, okay, if learners actually have to learn a language, in fact, what helps with their fluency, that is to say, fluency of reading, fluency of writing and speaking, fluency of comprehension and listening, is if they possess in their linguistic knowledge multi-word sequences in their mind, then they will process it. They will process a group of 4 words much faster than if they had to process each word individually. Okay? So there are economies from a cognitive perspective, and the brain seems to naturally do this. It memorizes short strings of language, and those short strings, in order for them to be memorized, the brain, the human being, has to perceive that they are indeed useful. So the more frequently a learner is exposed to and has to interact with multi-word groups, their brain is going to memorize it like a single lexical item. Okay. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that the brain, here's one, the brain, once it memorizes a group of words, it no longer perceives spaces. Okay, it deletes the spaces and just memorizes this as an entire single vocabulary item. Right? In other areas of research that are not forcibly corpus-based, there's another term called formulaic expressions or hala phrases. The same phenomenon has been named different things across different subdisciplines of linguistics. Okay, but from a literacy perspective, basically the brain learns to ignore the spaces and it sees the word if, and it very much like when you're typing on your phone, the phone calls up the next likely thing, and the next thing you know, it's typing out either the rest of the word or even a short phrase for you. That's based on the same principle. Okay. All right. So what you want to see, no doubt, are examples of multi-word phrases. So I will jump to page 14. Okay. So what they've done is they created a functional taxonomy. That is to say, they collected all these multi-word phrases and they decided to identify the contexts in which these things appear. Classroom teaching, that is to say, when the teacher is talking to the students or there's basically any classroom interaction. Okay, so they took verbal transcripts. Then, of course, there were the textbooks that learners were reading. Then, of course, there's conversation. I suspect if I were to go back into the definitions a little further up, that conversation would just be, casual people talking. And then, of course, there's academic writing. Okay. In order for learners to develop academic language and write academic sounding essays, and that goes for native speakers learning to write for college and non-native speakers learning to write in their new language, we have to learn how to present the ideas not only in a certain order, but to have the key phrases that flag to the reader what the author's intention is with those ideas. Okay? And that is indicated by this word stance. Okay? So you can look at this word stance as the attitude or the purpose or the function that the author wishes to convey by using this phrase. Okay? And epistemic stance means, I put the definition here because I think if you're not all familiar with the word epistemic, I even had to look it up. So epistemic talks about the source of knowledge or the nature of knowledge. And so all of these phrases down here indicate what the speaker's relationship is in knowledge to the thing they're talking about. Okay, so me as a speaker, I am indicating to the listener about my relationship, the state of my knowledge, that is to say, of whatever it is I'm talking about. I don't know if the students are going to meet me today. Okay, we have this fact, a proposition, students meeting the professor. And now I have to cast my own attitude or my own consciousness about that fact. So I'm going to communicate a stance, all right? And my stance is one of lack of knowledge. In a way, I am basically stating my uncertainty, okay? And what they found is that in classroom teaching and in conversation, these epistemic stances, lexical bundles, appear a lot, okay? How many times a day does any individual say, I don't know if? Okay, it happens a lot. And the fact that we're fluent, I don't know if, okay, there's a phonological fluency in our speech, that indicates that this whole bundle is actually stored in our minds as a single holistic unit. Okay? And so we basically store all these variations as large vocabulary items, and the brain just kind of deletes the spaces. Okay? If the brain needed to insert spaces because they actually wanted to insert a change, like we don't know, then it can do that. It has the capacity to break its own bundles down, okay? But that becomes a different part of the language mechanism that's able to pierce the boundaries of this stored item and make changes only when they're necessary. If the changes are not necessary, then the brain is likely to just take this single unit from long-term memory and for the purposes of fluency, use it. Okay? So in classroom teaching and conversation, we find these bundles. Okay? All right? Now, what we notice is that there's this interesting difference between personal and impersonal. Okay? How often are academic writing teachers telling their students, you need to sound objective, you need to sound objective. So what's the language of objectivity? How do we flag to the reader that we are being objective? Well, one of the ways that we do that, of course, is grammatically. If you recall, I don't know, might be before many of your times, there was a great scandal with Oliver North, who was a colonel or something of the United States. And it was during Ronald Reagan's era. I'm dating myself. And during the testimony, he said mistakes were made. Okay? He used the passive, okay, as a way of objectifying an idea and not taking ownership of it. Okay, so there's a distancing effect that goes on. How do we do it in other ways? Well, we do it in lexical ways besides grammatical ways. Okay, and the lexical way of flagging impersonal epistemic stance is to say things like are more likely to and the fact that. Okay, and what we find is that, look, hey, go figure, the impersonal stuff is actually located frequently in textbooks and in academic prose, and less frequently, at least from the corpus that these researchers were working in, non-existent in the classroom teaching and the conversation. Okay, obviously it depends on the conversation and depends who's speaking. We of course use these things, okay, but they are more frequent in textbooks and academic prose in the corpus that these researchers were using. Okay, so then they make a further taxonomy into attitudinal and modality. Okay, so they talk about desire, okay, personal desire, if you want to, I don't want to, do you wanna, okay, and it's actually do you want to, but in fact when we're speaking, when we're going at a normal rate of conversational speed, we reduce the phonology. That is to say, we remove phonemes to increase fluency, and we have do you wanna, and that again is an indication of holistic storage of a multi-morphemic unit in the brain. Okay, so here it is. And if you're grooving on this stuff, and you kind of should, because these are in fact the kinds of things you can create lesson plans out of this. Right? You can use these as sentence stems. Okay, and by sentence stems, you can create an activity where you don't have to give the student the beginning of the sentence. You can give the student a blank line and then insert the if you have all right, and you choose how much information to give or not to give. But if you want to force the learners to actually use these these lexical bundles, then you get them to fill in the blanks around it. Okay, so sentence stems, especially for the younger grades, I know we tend to use the beginning of the sentence as the stem, and then the students have to fill in the rest of the sentence. But nobody says that you have to do it that way. Okay, depending on your lesson, and depending upon whether you want to force the learners to use this kind of thing, you can go for it. All right. Actually, another thing that I do in order to assess my ESL learners' ability is I give them a sentence. If you have a moment to talk with me, okay. Oh, and by the way, let me just, I had a blank here. I don't know how many of you actually had kind of said, oh, well, what could possibly go in the blank? Well, by the time we get this far, we as native speakers have intuition about what kinds of possibilities can go into this, all right? And how many of you listeners out there decided that the word moment, a moment too, was going to go in there? Okay. The fact that we have these intuitions of possibilities is the basis is drawn on our own language experience, and that we have heard this in the past and we have used it in the past, and therefore we store these multi-word patterns and blanks with a narrow range of possibilities. Moment to work with me on this. So I can create a close activity. Imagine an entire paragraph. And if this is the lexical bundle I'm interested in, One of the things that I do to test my ESL learners' knowledge of the lexical bundles is I put the space there, right? And if I want to draw their attention to the fact at the end of the study that I want them to memorize this as a group, and I'm kind of a little picky about which bundles I want them to learn, then I just flag their attention with some brackets, and it forces them to focus on this whole group of words. Okay, so that's just a little quick teaching technique involving lexical bundles. All right, so this goes on and on and on. And then there's, of course, explanation in the article. Well, how can I get this, you ask? Well, it just so happens you have in your files folder Martinez and Schmidt. Okay, if you go to Files and you go to Readings, or sorry, if you go into Files, you're going to see word lists, right? And there is the Martinez and Schmidt word list. Schmidt is heavily involved in formulaic research, right? And this is basically the phrasal frequency list. In the same way that you have academic word frequency lists and the 1,000 most frequent words in the English language, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, all of which, by the way, are here in your files folder. This gives you, let's see, I believe this is the 1,000 most frequent lexical bundles. And look, if you happen to be teaching a speaking class, well, then maybe you want to emphasize that this lexical bundle is, you observe it in speaking. Chances are learners are going to acquire this because it's so frequent, right? And it's just ubiquitous. So you probably won't ever have to teach that, but to a beginner learner, maybe you want to at least tune their awareness to the structure of it. But we've got spoken, written, and written academic. And then, of course, there's an example phrase. And, okay. So this actual article breaks things down by frequency bands as well. It's not the full 2,000. I think the frequency band is working on particular elements of the lexical bundle, but either way, it's still broken down by frequency, so you get a sense of you can prioritize your lessons, basically. Okay, so that's all for lexical bundles. So why do we care about lexical bundles for the purposes of a text analysis assignment? Well, overall, the purpose of the assignment is to develop a sense of what makes, for example, a history textbook feel and sound like, if you will, a history textbook. What are the linguistic characteristics? What are the ways that the author packages ideas? And the Schepagrell text, the article that you read, really talks about how propositions are packaged in particular grammatical clothing and lexical clothing. Well, part of the lexical clothing is, in fact, going to be achieved to some degree by lexical bundles, okay? And other ways of doing it, of course, are through grammar and through specific vocabulary. But lexical bundles are indeed part of the package of patterns. Okay, so in the same way, for example, that these folks have identified that some lexical bundles are more frequent in textbooks than they are in actual conversation, and that these lexical bundles are used to convey facts, are also used to convey an authorial tone of objectivity in some cases, and in other cases, and in other texts that might be used to convey subjectivity. So, it's like you get reading comprehension questions, and very often one of the reading comprehension questions, I used to hate them, um, talks about what is the author's attitude towards dot dot dot. And in order for learners to be able to answer those kinds of questions, they need to have a grasp of a wide variety of this stuff in order to pull it off. Okay, and not only that, but they also have to have an understanding of the relationship between individual lexical bundles and how they fit in a network of other linguistic features to create a history text thumbprint as opposed to a science text thumbprint, as opposed to a language text thumbprint. So, anyway, that's all on lexical bundles, something for you to think about. And to hopefully be part of your analysis. It's not going to be forcibly the main thing, but it could. It's very likely that it will be present.